Yeah, good to go. All right. Oh, it's already on there. Okay, cool. Well, hi everybody. Um, well, so far this is the last talk, so it's been quite a ride. We've had a lot of speakers talking about a lot of things that we. Oh, is that supposed to happen? Yeah. Okay. Well, about a lot of things that we should do. A lot of interesting talks. So, quite honored that I get to close it. But first, a little thing about me. I'm Frank de Jonge. I'm 25 years old. I'm one of the locals here, and I work here in Amsterdam with a small company. We mainly code things for small advertisement agencies. And I'm also the core developer of the Vue-based PHP framework. So I saw some users here, and I heard it mentioned a couple of times, so I'm flattered to be here at the conference, and people are also using my stuff, so that's cool. Thanks. So I'm here to talk about the knowledge of others, and the knowledge of others, that title really doesn't say all that much. It says there is knowledge, and it doesn't belong to us. So we've got these two really fake concepts. First of all, you've got knowledge. That could be pretty much everything. We learn a lot of stuff, like during the course of this conference. We have learned a lot of stuff. And, well, in this conference, the others were basically the speakers, but also the people that you meet during the breaks. So that's the wait what of what's the title. What is knowledge? I looked it up. What was a good definition? There are multiple definitions of explaining what knowledge is, and this is probably the one that I found to most encapsulate and embody how we as developers look at knowledge. It is familiarity, awareness, or understanding gained through experience or study. How many people here are developers but didn't actually go to school to be a developer? So that's quite a lot. And I expect if you're at this level that you can understand what's going on here and use the frameworks that you do, use the tools that you do, that you have gained some knowledge along the way. Who of you have done studies to become where you are right now? So it's even more people that just gain through experience, and that's actually one of the things I find really strong, really well, exceptional about the field that we work in. So it's either from one or it's from the other. That's the most important part. Either you do it a lot of times and you get better at it, or you read and you become better. So what about the others? There's another statement right there. Different from those implied or specified. So basically, it's the people that we're not looking at, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So why are we doing this? Well, basically for the same reason you guys are all here. You're here to learn from different people, to take a look at what they've experienced. Like the last talk, he gave us a really good insight of what his process was, how he was learning, and how he was coming up with new stuff. In Taylor's talk, he did that as well, explain his process, and that's all basic knowledge that they've gained through their experience, and they share with you, so you don't have to have the same experience in order to have the same knowledge. So during this talk, I'm going to be looking at 3 points of perspective. First, I'm going to look at other developers. These are basically the people that are around us, like around us right now. Most of the times, just people from the community. I'm going to look at other frameworks. So these are people that we might talk to, but we don't use their tools. But we do come across the same problems as they do. And we're going to look at other languages. So first up, other developers. Other developers. So there are quite a few things that that define other developers, and I'm going to make a few assumptions. So other developers in our community, they use the same language. They might use the same framework. A lot of times, if you all use a specific package, say you use Amazon something, there's an IRC channel for that, so those are also the people right next to you. They also probably use different packages, so they have encountered problems and they've found a standardized way to do that, provided by somebody else. And they most likely solve problems differently than you would. Also, because everybody is at different skill levels, if you look around you, probably everybody is worse at something than you are. So, on the other hand, they're probably also better at a lot of things. And they're basically us. So we're not much different from the crowd we have around us. So what can we learn from them? We can learn to solve problems in a different way than we're used to. Everybody has like this bag of knowledge that they gained through experience. As we saw here, that's most of the people. Like, the way that people learn is, okay, I did something wrong, it bit me in the ass, so probably the next time I'm going to avoid that pitfall and not do it again. How to solve problems that we've never encountered. Sometimes we're dealing with problems, but we don't even know that we're dealing with problems. If other people are dealing with a problem and you didn't identify the problem at first, it helps to be around people that that solve things differently, so you can spot the things they're struggling with and learn from their struggles. How to explain something we're doing. Well, as I've seen in the IRC channel of Laravel and what you've seen here, there are a lot of people that are active members in the community, and they have to justify their actions. And by justifying their actions, you really have to think about what you're doing, and also make it presentable. So you actually learn more about your process if you teach it to somebody else. What they've done wrong. If they've run into issues, they will probably complain about it, and a lot of times it's their own fault. They made the code, so basically they made the problem, and you can spot that from a distance. You can also, on the other hand, see what they've done right. Of course, everybody writes good code most of the times. Let's hope so, else we wouldn't be here or make a living. So how can we benefit from them? Well, first of all, we can use the tools. These are the talks that we've seen. We saw the Symfony talk. It's basically telling us, I already solved this problem. If you want this problem to be solved, use my solution, and you're done with it. We can use their brain and their time. This is a little more theoretical. If you have a problem with some piece of code and you want somebody else to fix it for you, if you have a problem with, say, a package, you can just file an issue and the package maintainer hopefully solve that issue for you. So then you're also using their time and you're saving your own time. You can help them help you. This is probably something that every package maintainer encounters. You've got people in the community using your stuff. They encounter a problem, but they don't know how to report a problem in the most easy way for you to deal with. Jordi made a great example of creating a tool that he wrote to get debug information for himself. So he's providing a tool for them to use to help you. So it kind of works back and forth there. So what can we learn from them? That's basically, oh yeah. Well, that's just all that. Or we cannot do any of these. Like, we could use their tools, but then a problem would just go away. We wouldn't have to tackle it. If there's somebody doing a task over and over, like solving a problem, you can become better at solving problems. So don't use their time, use your own, invest it and learn from it. And don't let them help you, but help yourself. What about other packages? Well, you can use their tools. Let's say you're coding a framework for yourself, like I'm doing. I could drop my project and just use Laravel. We can use their bug fixes. Probably if somebody has encountered a problem and you're solving the same thing but in a different way, and there's always going to be more ways than one to solve a problem, but chances are they come across similar bugs that you have to encounter yourself. Like finding out what the deep end is of the HTTP protocol, or if you're looking at Redis, there are some edge cases and bugs that you need to fix, or if you look at platforms, like if you want something to run on Windows, you have to do certain things in order to make that work sometimes, but not all of the time. So if you look closely at other people developing, you can see what they're struggling with, and you can benefit from that. We can use their solutions. If we're encountering a problem, say we have a small package, like a really small database abstraction that really doesn't do all that much, but you want to have a nice schema builder. That's one of the things I did for the database layer I coded up. I didn't want to have to solve everything from the schema myself, so I pulled in Doctrine and used that solution. Basically the same as what Laravel also does with many of its tools. And use the problems. To be preemptive in the strike of bug fixing, you can look at several projects and see what kind of bugs are outstanding there. Chances are that if another package is bigger, the community is going to look at more stuff and find more bugs. But that doesn't mean the bugs aren't in your code. They could be there as well, but they just haven't been encountered. So basically what we've heard the entire time is don't reinvent the wheel. Use packages or knowledge from other people. Use design patterns that people have studied and learned, and use their tools basically. There are quite a few reasons for it. So first of all, you live in the real world, so you don't need to do everything by yourself. That's the great thing about the open source community. If you have an issue with a specific project, or you need an implementation of some sorts, just go to packages, search it, and probably there's going to be a well-tailored solution for you. Stuff needs to get done. Reinventing the wheel costs a lot of time. So if you want to do, you're not going to do HTTP foundation for every project over and over. Of course, you'll learn more by doing that, but it's way too time consuming and it doesn't have any added benefits when you're in production. So work needs to be done in time and work needs to be done on time. Also, more code, more problems. Like if we don't have any code, there aren't any problems. Well, there's just one problem. You haven't created code that does the work for you. But as soon as we start fixing problems, most of the time you can divide them into different subsections of problems. But most of the times you just encounter them when you're working on a problem. So problems will appear when you're working on the big picture. So this is one of the nice tweets concerning that. I don't know, quite a lot of people saw this, 20,000 retweets, so you might have come across it. And this is basically, everybody can identify with this. You fix one thing, shit starts to blow up, and yeah, all your unit tests fail. Well, luckily we now know how to unit test, so this probably won't happen anymore. But what do we miss out on? There's a lot we're missing out on. Learning things. So let's go from don't reinvent the wheel to do reinvent the wheel. There are quite some people that agree with me on this. Jomo Schreuder was a guy that was also on the Vue PHP team, and when we started working on different solutions for different problems, we'd go through iterations just by checking everything out and then rebuilding. And in that process, you learn a lot. So if you never reinvent the wheel, why would you know it's round in the first place? That it has to be round in the first place. Another one from Jeff Atwood. Don't reinvent the wheel unless you're planning to learn more about wheels. Reasons to reinvent the wheel. So the existing package or implementation sucks. This can be a deal breaker. We've all switched from one framework to the other. Sometimes you don't have to. You could just pull in resources in order to make your life better. But like your framework is your home. So you have to feel comfortable in that. It has to allow you to pull things in. Like in CodeIgniter, of course, you could just add Composer to that, pull in the packages, but then probably you'd have to do all the bootstrapping yourselves. So that's not really nice. In more modern frameworks, you have service providers, which makes that process a lot easier. So that's an implementation factor that you can have. You're learning about design patterns. There are things that are not very complicated. Like you can learn about design patterns and be coding the simplest calculator. Things don't have to be difficult in order to practice a pattern. The other way around, if you're learning about a specific problem or solution, you could just focus on that and really make it the best as you can. And that way you have to solve a problem, so you have a goal, you know what you're working towards. And you encounter a lot of errors along the way that you have to fix yourself. Or the package you use is abandoned. This, well, yeah, it happens sometimes, and people generally don't like it. More reasons. This is more in the process of problem solving. So when you're encountering a problem, the first thing you need to do is identify the problem. Then you need to see what the scope of the problem is. So if we're doing an HTTP foundation, the scope of the problem is quite big. We have to look at the server, super global, the input, everything there. We have to call certain methods to or functions to start a session. So it's really all over the place. Or if you're coding up like a MongoDB abstraction, I did that once, and I learned a lot during that process. So, but that's a really confined piece of code that you're working on. So the scope of the problem is then fine. This also helps that you're not creating a Frankenstein do-it-all monster, because that tends to happen in, well, badly designed code. So first think about what you're actually going to solve and how far that reaches. In the process of fixing it, so right now we know what the problem is, we know how big the problem is, so now we can divide it up into multiple sections. Like you want separation of concern always in your code, or if the scope is small, you can separate less, but that's basically up to you. And also that decision is something that you learn day by day. It's just going over that process and yeah, making that better. And then you're actually going to have to solve the problem. So we know what problems are contained in that one ginormous problem, and then we need to fix every bit of that problem while keeping the bigger picture in mind. This is also something that you learn when you repeat the process. And of course, we're going to screw up along the way. That just happens. But write it out and learn to fix your mistakes. I've seen people beginning packages, and along the way they've encountered some problems, and they didn't stick with it, and they decided to leave and use another project that was already available to them. But you miss out on a learning opportunity there. So looking at code, we're gonna look at other languages now and look at some code. First a synopsis, because we need to know what we're coding. I've got a really abstract thing. We've got a routine that could be anything, like I want to send an email or put something in the cache. The routine returns a success boolean, so it's either going to be true or false. When stuff goes wrong, we're going to get an exception. We want to react when the routine is executed. And we want to allow for multiple listeners to respond to that. And we want to allow for multiple types of listeners. And we want to get the result back. So not only react on it, but also get the results, actually. And we want an easy way to inject ourselves into the process. And lastly, we want an easy and understandable API. So we're going to use an existing component, in this case Symfony. So I'm now going to switch to my editor. Who of you have used the event package by itself? Not a lot of people. Well, the event dispatcher is really quite a simple mechanism. You have a dispatcher which sends out events, and people can, objects can listen to it, and it emits events. So pretty straightforward. The way you set it up, like here, we just say new dispense event dispatcher, and now we have one of the listeners that we want to register to it. I've made a custom listener. You can, there are several ways to do this. This is just the least intrusive way, like I'm using the least amount of this code right now. So basically it's a class custom listener. In the construct we have to inject a dispatcher, and it's going to register itself. This could be in another method like listen to this dispatcher or whatever, really doesn't matter. In this case, just put it here. And it's got several responses to different events. So on top you see I've got my routine done, my routine fail, and my routine always. And it maps to a corresponding method. So everything in the add listener second parameter needs to be callable. So it's going to be called when that event triggers. Pretty straightforward. So if we look at this, this is when this is always going to be called. This is going to be called when it's done, and this is going to be called when there's an exception. So it failed. So it's gonna say, I'm either happy, sad, or in tough luck, bro. So we set it up. New custom listener, we inject the dispatcher, so we've got that in place. But because we're using Symfony, we need to extend the route, the event class, in order to pass a response, a result to the handler. So we set that up. It's not really complicated. The event doesn't need any extra code. So all you do is your code in there, and Symfony will handle the rest. You don't need to put anything in constructors or whatever. My routine, that's going to be the actual stuff that is executing something. So I've made a class that executes a routine. The main thing is run. We throw the event dispatcher in there, we save it locally, and then we're going to pick, this is just going to be a random result. So this is not anything that really does anything. We're just trying to simulate multiple outcomes of what could be it. I'm not going to cache it because probably on my machine it's going to work every time and I won't get an exception. So that doesn't really help me. So I've got two options, done or fail. I'm going to choose either one of them. First, dispatch the always event, so those events will get handled. And then generate a random result. That's going to be a Boolean. It's going to be either 1 or 2, and check if it's 1. So it's either true or false. Then dispatch either done or event. So I suffix it, and then the dispatcher will know which one to trigger. So here's how we make it run. So normally that would just be logic that you abstract away and reuse. So we're creating a routine. We're throwing in the dispatcher, and we're going to run fire run. So now I'm going to actually execute this code. Let's hope this works. Oh, wait. Yeah. You could already see some of the output, but just to show you it really works. So now I'm in tough luck. And because it's random, it's going to generate different kinds of results every time. But we can see now that the actual event handlers are being handled. And we get different results based on different outcomes. So the event dispatcher and the logic we build around it will make sure the right message is sent and the right event is triggered. All right. And we're back. So what we've done, just to summarize, we've used Symfony to handle all the event logic. That's pretty straightforward. Well, there's actually a lot more to event handling than I just showed you. But for basic events, Symfony handles it really well. We've registered 3 different events with a dispatcher, and I'm going to explain in a minute why that's a problem. Well, actually, I'm going to explain it now. It's actually one event fired, but it's just 3 different scenarios. And the event model is not really suited to handle that situation. Also, we needed to create an event extension in order to pass a value that we need to evaluate there in abstraction. That's not really handy. Also, we needed to figure out ourselves which event to fire. So we created a suffix for that, so that's us figuring it out. So what can we do about it? We could create an abstract solution which uses the Symfony component. So basically do what we just did, but then standardize it and make a convention out of the success or fail or always suffix. That is one problem solution, but it could become a problem because we could run into collisions. If you have several events that you register, this solution will interfere with others. So if there's another other piece of code saying, well, I want to unregister the myRoutine done event, that's going to basically mess with the code we just written before. And because it is an abstraction, we won't see that that actual event is being registered. So we're creating a black box for ourselves, and we can kind of get lost in there. Or another way is we could expand Symfony's component itself. You could create a new class within Symfony that handles that logic and does it in a way so that it's isolated and not intrusive in the event system. But you wouldn't know if that would get accepted, would be a whole addition to the Symfony's component. And if the Symfony contributors don't like it, it's not going to get in. But what the hell, we're learning, so we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to do this by looking at another language. In this case, we're going to use JavaScript. Not a lot of people are happy when we enter the world of JavaScript. But sometimes there are pretty nice lessons to be learned because although you might not like the language, they do encounter various problems more often than we do, like programming for events. Yeah, you do that a lot more in JavaScript. So it's logic to look at it. So we're going to go back to the editor. This is all the JavaScript you're going to see today, so it's not going to be a whole JavaScript talk. This is a pretty simple example of an AJAX request. We're using the get method, and we're requesting something.json. And basically, we've got the same thing as we had going on before, just now we're alerting stuff. It's always going to alert this always happens. And when it fails, it alerts. It fails. And when it's done, it's going to be done. So that is all the JavaScript we need. So I'm just going to stick around here for a little while. What we see here is a pattern. It's something that's reused in JavaScript over and over. In JavaScript, you've got callback hell, like super deep nesting. You've got a couple of strategies in order to solve this problem. You don't want to pass around a callback everywhere and wrap every callback and then send it off to the next thing. That's just going to get messy, and you really don't know where you are anymore if you're trying to debug. But for an AJAX request, there are just a couple of things going to happen. Either it's going to go well, or it's going to go wrong. Always, it's going to be triggered. So always is always going to fire. When it fails, we fail, and when it's done, it's done. And we're back. Yeah. Now I'm going to try to solve the same problem, but then using PHP. So I've come up with, I don't know if there's any implementation of this already. Probably there already is, but I've coded up the concept of a promise in PHP. I've created a sort of like a wrapper class that you can use. So we've got a promise class. It needs a promisable-ish thingy, and stores that. It's got a couple of properties that you can set, the exception, the result, and you've got a stack of observers, which are all empty at first. And then we can register stuff to it. So we've got functions to see if it fails, then we put it on that stack. If it's always going to have to run, we put it on the always stack. Same for done, so it's pretty much covers the entire synopsis that we had in the JavaScript. For ease of use, I'm just using the same names. Is that? Yeah. And then we've got the run function. In JavaScript, it's going to run right away, and we can register the events later because it's asynchronous, and the request will end later than the execution of the JavaScript. But in PHP, we can't do that because it kind of works top-down in a script. So we'll have to call the run afterwards, after we've done everything. It's not really true. You can also design a pattern around it and see if it has been run and then execute everything. But for this example, that's way too much. So if we run, it's going to try to run the promisable. It's going to catch take the result into the result parameter. And if there's an exception, it's going to cache it and store it locally. Normally, this is not what you want to do because you don't want to do every kind of exception. So you probably want to make that configurable so that you can see what kind of exception you're going to catch. So you don't get a black box out of nowhere. And when it's run, we want to notify our observers. So here, again, we're checking what kind of observers we need to trigger. We're going to fetch those observers and merge them with the always observers. And then we're going to, because all the observers are callables, we're just going to call them and pass in the result. There's also a way to get the exception or get the results, but we don't really need that. And just so we're clear on what we're getting in, we're relying on that method run to be available in the object passing in. We've created an interface which just has one promisable run method. So this is the all the code for the basic abstraction of a promise. And now we're going to use it. So I'm including just directly. Here we've got our same process again, the routine. It's just going to be a promise. So this could be a wrapper, a class around your logic or whatever, as long as the stuff that needs to get fired is fired in the run. And it returns either 1 or 3. Or it throws an exception, or it's going to do true or false. So when we do that, we say the promise, new promise, and we inject the promise routine, and then we've got the promise set up. But now we also, like in the last case, we're going to need a listener. But due to the API that we've created for ourselves, which is not going to change because it's never going to be not false or true, it's either going to be one of those, or something terribly has gone wrong, or it's going to be always, and you just want to always call something. So we're going to register the events again, and these are exactly the same. So based on response, happy or sad, in tough luck, bro. And we're going to create the new custom listener, inject the promise in there, and then run the promise. So, so this basically does the same thing as the Symfony code does. The only advantage that the advantage that we've had here is that we now have a new pattern that we can model our software after. We don't need to abuse another pattern in order to suit our needs. And we've learned how to identify the scope of the project. And there we go. So now I'm going to look at another language to solve a problem that we've had in PHP. Are there any Python developers here? I see a couple of hesitant hands. So not that many, but Python is a really easy language if you're coming from PHP, so you won't be really intimidated by it. But we've got a problem in PHP. That's this. We have a dispatcher, and we've got several events that we want to trigger. Normally, you'd have to for each over it and dispatch every event manually. It's not really a problem, but we're programmers, so we automate stuff. So we created just a plain function for us, and it's gonna accept a dispatcher and then some events, and then then it's just gonna run these events. So a PHP solution would be, I've got, actually that example there was wrong. I'm gonna retype it for you. Here. We just want to pass it normally, like normal arguments. So this is what we see in a lot of functions that we use in PHP. It's easier to just get a bunch of parameters, just let that extend, and then catch that later on. Things like array merge of the PHP internal functions, they work like this. So in some cases you would want to do it like this. But I'm now creating a problem. Well, it's not really a problem because it's not that much of an issue, but it's some people, they don't think it's all that clean, because what do you get in PHP? You get this. You get this function. It gets the event dispatcher, and there are no arguments after that. But inside the code, we're going to fetch all the arguments and then remove one from the beginning of it and just have the rest, and we use that. But there are several problems with this. If you are using an IDE, there's no auto-completion for those functions or methods. So you wouldn't know what to throw at it. If you're expecting strings there, you could just be throwing a bunch of arrays, or think, oh, I should just throw one array at them at the function. But that's not really what you want to do. You want to be implicit and make sure people understand what you mean and how they should use your function. So the solution here is change PHP. But first we're going to look at how Python solves this problem. So as you can see, Python looks really simple. We've got a dispatcher. We don't need to prefix it with anything, not like var like in JavaScript. That's just the constructor is like calling a function. And then we can do multi-dispatcher, basically the same thing that we've done in PHP. And here I had the parameters correctly. So this is going to be the function for that. But you can see it's a lot different from what we have to do in PHP. For starters, we don't have the function get arguments, and we don't need to manipulate that array in order to get left with what we need. There's a little special syntax there where you have it's called an asterisk, the starry thingy. And then we're going to loop through the events. Well, in Python, that's the other way around. It kind of seems, if you're not familiar with it, for event in events, kind of makes sense if you read it out loud. If you read it, it can be kind of confusing. So dispatcher dispatch the event. And that's just 3 lines of code. Well, mostly that's gained by not using brackets, but still it's it's less code to execute per line. So we've got Nikita Popov. I don't really know how to pronounce the last name, nor do I know if it's a guy or a girl. I tried to figure it out, but I can't. So if anybody knows this person and knows of what gender it is. Huh? It's a guy. Okay, it's a guy now. I didn't know whether to address it with him or her, so I didn't want to be sexist. So just to get that out of the way, we've had too many conferences where that's gone wrong. Let's not make this into one of them. So what he, well, not really invented, because it's kind of already out there, isn't it? We saw in the Python language that we can use this special syntax in order to something that they call variadic arguments. That's a little weird word. I didn't know what it was actually, but it's just an arbitrary argument list, just like in plain. I kind of struggled through that, but that's a lot easier to understand than variadic arguments. So they're optional arguments. Default value is always an array, so whether you specify a default value in your function or not, it's always going to be an array. It's a grouping of all unspecified trailing arguments. So we don't specify it anywhere. So basically, it stops one in the front, and everything that's trailing is going to be combined into that one argument. One of the more awesome features about this is they can also be type hinted. So variadic arguments in PHP, what would they look like? Well, actually, I find this kind of funny because Python is normally the language that's human readable. Like if you read a piece of Python, it's basically a book, they say. But this kind of reminds me more about how we text and how we tweet. Because, yeah, here you've got the function, and then you've got everything that needs to be there, and events. So it's optional. And so now we can easily loop through all the events. We don't need to do anything with it. We don't need to slice any arguments. Also, this is going to be available for auto-completion. So your IDE, once it gets smart enough to understand this, is going to know what he's going to have to do with it, especially when you have type-hinted things, like you can say it needs to be an array of arrays, so you can push arrays there. Or if you're looking at the observer pattern, you need to, one subject needs more observers. So you can just toss an array there, and they all have to be of the same type. So actually that's quite a lot better than Python did it in the first place, so we're beating them on that, just on that department. Just so you know, this is only an RFC right now. So there's an actual patch for this, and I pray to God that it's going to be in 5.6, because this can really clean up a lot of code for a lot of packages. It's quite easy to look up the links, and if more people support the RFC, or give feedback to her, the higher the chances are that that's going to get in. So if you can, please support it. I would be really glad if this comes in, and hopefully some of you as well. So this is another way of looking at solving a problem. If PHP doesn't solve a problem, but another language does, you can bring it into PHP. Well, you'll have to learn C for that, but yeah, we're learning other languages anyway, so why not learn 2 other languages? We probably learn more lessons through that as well. Another way to solve problems, because that's basically all we're doing, we're identifying a problem and then we're going to solve it. We don't need to solve everything with PHP. And there are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, PHP doesn't have to solve your problem. If there's some other tool that's better at the job, why not use that language? Like if you do data comparison and you need super large batches of data to compute, PHP might not be the best language for you. You might use a different language altogether, or a language that's good in statistics, that's actually built for solving its problem. Our language might be bad, with the problem. Well, in the case of data computing, that's the case. You don't want to do complex image manipulations like Photoshop actions in PHP. Actually, you can, but most of the time it just take forever in order to do that. If you want to do like pixel bender kind of things. Actually, a guy made a package where you can do that with. It's the C extension, the QB C extension. You can do that with it in a reasonable time, but still, you might be better off using a different tool. And if there's already another tool out there in a language more suited, then you could just use a tool from a different language, even if it's not in PHP. One of these things, does anybody here use ascetic? Sometimes, not a lot of people. Well, for the people that don't know it, ascetic solves a problem of managing your assets. So if you've got an asset collection, a file asset, and you pull everything in, and it has all these kinds of filters, and it can compile your less for you, minify your JavaScript, all these kinds of things, and then pack it into one file. So what's loaded off of your server is very small, actually. But now we're depending on PHP to do our JavaScript and less compilations. Okay, this is why we could do it in PHP. So you want to manage assets. You have multiple modules that need to register assets. So in PHP, you already probably have a way for modules to talk with a ginormous system. You could just pass some messages around, and the big container will know what's up. And you want to optimize and compile your output, and you already know PHP, and that's also a really valid reason. But you don't have to use it. There are other ways to fix this problem. There are tools out there which solve this problem way better. And ascetic creates problems of its own. One is really theoretical. Basically, PHP now becomes dependent on JavaScript. If you're using compilers and optimizers for your JavaScript code, those compilers are going to be written in JavaScript. So now you've got your PHP talking to your JavaScript, and you've got kind of a conflict of interest going on, and you could avoid it. This is the way that I do my asset management. It's through Grunt. That's a tool that's actually designed to eliminate this problem. Just so you see, this is what a grunt config looks like. It's just a small file that you have some configurables in. And here I have my compressor. I've got my less compiler here. I'm also compiling Hogan templates, which nothing in PHP can do. So I'm already forced either to reinvent the wheel there, or just move everything over to JavaScript and let JavaScript handle everything. On top of that, I can make JavaScript watch the file system locally. So every time I save a file, it will generate it again. And it's not really a lot of config. This is all for quite a big project. So take a different perspective on the problem. PHP doesn't have to solve it. You can move the problem into an area which is better at solving it. So here I'm saying PHP doesn't do it anymore, but I'm creating a way for PHP to push things out there so Grunt can pick it up. So I'm making a folder, and I want all my JavaScript, all my dependencies to be loaded in there. JavaScript will pick that up because there's something new in the folder, and it'll do all this magic. So PHP won't have to. We use grunt to compile and optimize it. And if you really want to automate everything for, say, deployments, if you have Node on your server, you can also use the composer update, like the post install command, to trigger grunt, and it will build automatically for you. So these are my top takeaways. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. You can rebuild every tool in PHP, but you can also look at other languages, see how they solve it. You might learn something along the way. Just because you shouldn't doesn't mean you can't. We've heard a lot of talks about, yeah, you should write it like this, you should do it like this. Those are people that have encountered the problem, they've dealt with it, they've learned from it, and so can you. So just because somebody tells you to, doesn't mean you should. If you know more tools, chances are you'll pick a better one. If you can make a problem go away, you don't have to fix it. Like with aesthetic, you have to inject that into your entire system. That's a problem you need to solve. If you just make one publish simple thing, it's dealt with. And this is my last one. I don't really know how to pronounce this because it's Latin. Repetitio est mater studiorum. Repetition is the master of study. So just repeat that process over and over. It might be painful at some times, but you'll get better eventually. That's it. Oh, okay. No questions. Nah.
Yeah, we're out of time for questions. But thank you, Frank.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, well, that concludes the talks.